Let's review what Bobby just said. Terry was in perfect health that day. He just had lunch with her that afternoon. She did mention she'd been fighting with her husband Michael all day. Then all of a sudden she mysteriously collapses. They never did come up with a reason for it. None of the stuff you read about it being an eating disorder was not true. So Bobby finds out she's collapsed. They all find out. She goes to the hospital. She was never dying. Remember, all she had was for her treatment was food and water. Terry had trouble swallowing. That's all. She was never hooked up to machines. She was never brain dead. This is very important that you listen to this part because the mainstream news didn't want to tell us that. Let's get back and hear what else Bobby has to say.
And take people back to that hospital scene and what happens after that. Michael sues the doctors and is awarded how much in court for her care? Or go back and talk about that part.
The collapse was 1990.
Okay.
Michael initiated a medical malpractice trial against Terry's treating physician and her gynecologist. And it went to trial in November of 1992, so about 2.5 years after collapse. And Michael was suing for $20 million. That was the number they came up with that was going to be needed for Terry's lifelong care and rehabilitation.
Lifelong.
Lifelong care. There was no mention. Okay. Terry had no verbal, she had no written advance directive.
Okay.
And there was nothing in writing that said, in case I ever became incapacitated, what would I want? And so Michael intended at that time in 1992 at the medical malpractice trial, it seemed to us and the jury and everybody else that he intended to take care of Terry for the rest of his life and her life.
And you said before he was acting concerned.
Yes, he was working with her family to give her rehabilitation and therapy. But there was a medical malpractice trial that he was preparing for during these 2 years.
Got it.
But at the trial, at the medical malpractice trial, he recited his wedding vows to the jury and said, I took Terry for sickness and health, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to take care of her for the rest of her life. And,
I thought it was really interesting how Bobby says a jury awarded Michael $1.5 million to take care of Terry. He pleaded with them. He read his wedding vows to the jury and said, all I want to do is take care of my wife. That's all I want to do. He sued for $20 million. They ended up giving him $1.5 million for her care. So after this all happens, all of a sudden things take a different turn. Isn't that a surprise? He takes her home, and all of a sudden she gets 2 different infections. And her husband tells the hospital, don't treat these infections. Without treatment, she would have died. The hospital calls up Terry's parents and said, you know, this husband wants her not to be treated, and I'm sorry, legally we have to treat her. They were shocked. They knew something was very, very wrong at that moment. Happened 2 different times. All of a sudden, everything changed. $1.5 million trust came for her care, but there was one other thing that happened. Her parents wanted to take her home to take care of her, and Michael said no. They would have done anything. All they wanted was Terry. Michael said no. They couldn't do it. Not only could they not treat her, they couldn't treat these infections. He didn't allow flowers in the room. He didn't allow music. He didn't allow light. He didn't allow cards. He didn't allow visitors. He didn't allow any kind of therapy of any kind. Why do you think that was? Let's get back to the interview.
Okay, so at this point, have you gone to an attorney or?
well, we did. We tried to remove him as guardian.
Okay, remove him as guardian.
And we were unsuccessful. We were unsuccessful getting him removed. So things kind of quieted down between after that, which was sometime in 1994. Quieted down somewhat, and we were just going on, trying to offer Terry as much stimulation as possible, still looking into ways of getting Michael to give Terry back to us.
And you're visiting every day. You're in there.
Well, my parents were. I was away at school. I was actually away at college from 1993 to 1997. But when I would come home, I would visit my sister. My parents were visiting her. And we were just my parents were trying to figure out ways to get her back from being under Michael's control.
And the whole time, your parents are willing to take her home and take care of her.
That's all they wanted. They wanted to do
He
it.
would be free to do, and he could have.
But he would lose.
But he couldn't have the money.
Because the trust was there to be used for Terry's care, rehabilitation. If he would, if Terry would die, then he would get the trust. He would get the money.
That's the only way.
And that was the only way he could get the money. So she would have to die.
Okay. What happens next?
Well, our family was blindsided. In 1997, we got a letter from Michael Schiavo's attorney that he was going to petition the court to remove her feeding tube.
Her feeding tube was his next idea.
Yes.
By this time, had there been stories in the paper?
Well, there was, but it was all, it was back in we needed money for, Terry had some experiments done on her, and there was some fundraising one time with Terry. So Terry made news, but it was all for good. It was all good thing back then. It wasn't anything about ending her life.
Okay, so at that point, you go to court then?
Well, 1997, he petitioned the court.
He petitioned the court to
remove
the feeding tube.
And it took about 3 years before it actually went to trial.
And she is, again, tell everybody what you told us. She was not dying.
Not dying.
She was not brain dead.
Absolutely not.
And that has been...
No doctor ever diagnosed Terry as being brain dead. She was extremely, she was very responsive.
Very responsive.
In fact, I said today that in her medical notes, the nurses, when she was getting rehabilitation and therapy, when Michael was allowing rehabilitation and therapy, because it all stopped in 1992 and 1993, Terry was making improvements where she was starting to speak. The doctors and nurses were making records in her medical charts that said she was speaking, saying words, so she was improving.
And I think it's important what you have on the website. I love this. I mean, I don't love it, but I love the fact you guys are talking about it. There was no flowers allowed in the room, light in the room. People don't know this.
It got really nasty. I mean, it turned into a very nasty battle between Michael and her family, and he was doing things to, we believe, just to
hasten her death.
Well, hasten her death and provide my parents with, this seems to be some of the things he was doing were just mean-spirited, and there was no reason for him doing some of the things.
So this wasn't any way near the way we heard it as the public America heard the story.
It kept being described as an end-of-life issue.
End of life.
And let Terry die. She wasn't dying.
She was not dying.
She was as physically healthy as you or I.
I think, and you said she could have been brought here in a wheelchair.
She could be part of this interview. All she needed was a wheelchair, and we could have taken her anywhere. But people had this perception, because of the media, because of Michael Schiavo, because of his attorney, that she was confined to this bed, and she couldn't leave the bed. And it was absolutely false. I mean, we could take her anywhere. There was nothing attached to her. She got fed with a feeding tube, and when she was done getting fed, they took away the feeding tube. So she was free, completely free.
I am so glad you clarified that.
People don't realize it, but I'm sure that they see people like my sister every day, out and about. Because families I see people like
Washington Square, I mean, our own Lloyd Center, our own shopping center.
There are people like my sister, there's tens of thousands of them, and I'm sure people every day come across them and don't even realize it. Because of the way my sister was portrayed so wrongly by Michael, but they had to. This thing got so public that they had to portray her in this fashion because they wanted to kill her.
Remember what Bobby said. Terry wasn't dying. Terry was never brain dead. Terry wasn't hooked up to any kind of machines. All she needed was help swallowing. They put in a feeding tube to give her nourishment. They took it out. Bobby said she could have been part of our interview. She could be right here in this studio today. We could have brought her in a wheelchair. She could have gone out anywhere had he allowed it. This is very unusual. The world was never told her husband Michael would be able to inherit the money, the big jury award, if Terry died, and only if Terry were dead. And Bobby says all of a sudden, when he went through this big court hearing saying, I want to take care of my wife, I want to take care of my wife for the rest of her life,